Joining me is the political panel, Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Labor leader Bill Shorten, and now Director of GXO Strategies, and Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer. Michael Costa, how important is this fall in inflation, first to Australians, but second to the government?
Well, look, I think it's right to say it's good news. You want inflation going in the direction it's currently going, and it is underneath the Reserve Bank forecast. However, as I've said constantly when we've discussed this topic, you've also got to look at the employment figures, and really those employment figures are going to be critical to any rate cut. Last time the employment figures came under what was expected. I'm talking about the unemployment figures. By the Reserve Bank. So you've got both sides to look at, and that's by design. I think the Treasurer's got a real gall to claim that he planned for this. I can't forget what he was doing in early December when he was running around, attacking the Reserve Bank, trying to put pressure on it because it was going to ruin the Australian economy. I mean, you just look at the press clippings from that period and you can see he wasn't planning on this. Certainly it's good news, but it creates a real dilemma for them because if they do cut rates in February, you can almost guarantee there won't be any cut in April. So in terms of an election date, they've got some real dilemmas here. And when do you go? And 25 basis points ain't going to cut it on the cost of living because they've got no credibility on that issue.
Cameron Milner, what's your take?
Well, Andrew, we polled this and I showed you the polling when we did it. We asked the question what size of interest rate cut would actually affect people's vote and would it make them vote for Labor? So we asked this question. And regrettably for Albo, even a 1%, so 4 cuts, even a 1% cut wasn't going to shift the dial electorally. So I think there's a lot more complex problem for Albanese than just hoping the RBA dropped by 0.25 on the back of these inflation numbers. I mean, the issue is far more complex. Cost of living is there for everyone. And the reality is, even though the rate of inflation has come down, prices are still much higher than they were 3 years ago. And that's the critical test electorally for people when they come to vote. So Albanese might think this is the silver bullet. I don't think it is. And to Michael's point, the economy is far more complex and voters' concerns are far more complex than just 1.25% interest rate cut before they come to vote.
Yeah, I agree with you both. Michael, it seems to me, the government's putting an awful lot of weight on a small cut in interest rates that hasn't yet been delivered, by the way, after 12 rate rises under Labor, when in fact it doesn't really do much for anyone who's renting or have paid off their home. Probably does badly for people living off the interest on their savings.
Oh, look, a 25 basis point cut will not make any difference to even people with mortgages, to be brutally honest, given where inflation is at the moment, because clearly the inflation figures show that it's gone up by 2% over the last period. So, a 25 basis points not going to even help them because they're behind the 8 ball. But they're desperate, Andrew. They've got no other choice but to sell this as, great economic management. The issue for them is, as I said, this political dilemma. How do you sell a cost of living package if there is a rate cut in February that has credibility with the electorate? I mean, the tax cuts were absorbed and had no real political bounce. I just don't think people believe them. They're not listening to this government and they are in serious trouble, and they've got this dilemma with the budget coming up as well.
See, this all goes to why I'm spending a bit of time on why they would put so much weight on this small cut if it comes, Cameron, is this. I said a couple of times last year on this show why, Albanese should be calling for an election before Christmas. He should have had an election before Christmas because the trend was not his friend. It would only get worse. And you saw his popularity sinking. And since Christmas, it has kept sinking and no sign of that stopping. Why did he do that instead of waiting for this Hail Mary pass from the Reserve Bank that it still hasn't thrown?
Oh, because this guy's a great procrastinator. I mean, he has feet of clay when it comes to leadership. The only quick decision Albert ever makes is when he's got a retirement villa to buy for $4.3 million. This guy is so slow to make decisions. I mean, he stayed playing tennis while a synagogue kept burning. I mean, this guy is not a leader who makes decisions quickly. So I'm expecting him to go full term potentially and waste all those opportunities you quite rightly identified because the numbers haven't got any better. the numbers aren't going to get any better because everyone sees Albo for what he is. And voters don't like Albanese and they're not voting Labor as a consequence. So, yes, he should have gone last year. He should have gone much sooner. But that's Dutton's advantage, and voters will pass their judgment if and when we finally have an election day.
I don't get it either. Michael Costa, meanwhile, and every time I say, look, they've come up with a great idea, you say, no, it's rubbish. So with nervousness, you say, meanwhile, Peter Dutton has come up with a promise that's almost as popular with Labor voters as it is with Liberal ones, which is just incredible. A Resolve poll shows that 69% of voters like Peter Dutton's promise, if he becomes Prime Minister, to stop foreign investors buying residential property. Now, he says it's to help local bidders get into the housing market, which is almost impossible if you're poor or young. I also wonder whether, for a lot of the people polled, it's actually a proxy for saying, do you want immigrants stopped at the border, whether they want to buy a house or not? What do you make of his idea?
Oh, look, I think the idea is, good politics, but bad economics and finance, to be honest with you. But I agree with you. I think you're absolutely on the money with this. It's a dog whistle for immigration. Unfortunately, that's where it's at, because it's really not going to make any impact. A 2-year suspension of foreign buyers in the Australian housing market, where they're a very small percentage, they might be a visible percentage, but they're a very small percentage, is not going to deal with the supply problems. And either will a 25 basis point decrease in mortgage increase people's ability to buy. So I look, good politics, troublesome economics, if you ask me.
Cameron, just finally, I've been struck. We had Albanese come back very early from his holidays to start campaigning a week before Peter Dutton got out of his bed, and it hasn't worked. Now, I'm just wondering, looking at Peter Dutton, Labor said a couple of years ago quite openly he was unelectable, he looked too scary, he looked too mean, all blah, 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 and yet he's is neck and neck with the Prime Minister in the popularity, and all the polls now say the Liberals are ahead of Labor, two-party preferred. Mm-hmm. Is any of this really due to Peter Dutton? What has Peter Dutton done to make himself electable, do you think?
Well, I think he picked the mood right. I mean, even when The Age and the ABC were decrying how terrible he was on The Voice, he picked the mood. He said no to The Voice. And 60% of Queenslanders, and across Australia, I should say, 60% of Australians said no to The Voice. So he picked it right there. He's also kept the government honest with all the broken promises. I mean, he's actually done what the opposition leader should do, which is actually point out where Albo's failed on a regular basis. But I don't think there's any more help that Peter Dutton's needed than Albo himself. I mean, the Qantas upgrades, the freebie tickets, the retirement villa. I mean, this guy is so tone deaf to what is happening out there with the cost of living. He's helped Peter Dutton every single day of the campaign. But that's not to give credit to Peter Dutton, who I think has been a strong opposition leader, has got some good ideas out there, has had the courage to put nuclear on the agenda, which he should be given full marks for. And I think the election campaign is going to be far more competitive than even the polling's saying it will be.
I think his decision to promote nuclear was a very clever way to look positive rather than negative, because otherwise he would have had to fight on global warming, which would have made him been much stickier for him. Much better to argue about nuclear as the solution. Michael Costa, Cameron Milner, thank you very much to you both.